Quite often on my podcast, I am very free to point out the hypocrisy of the modern day church and our society as a whole. And what I'm finding today is things that I've written on this subject before, I have a little different perspective as to how our modern day church is dealing with this. And I think that's good news. It's good news that the church has corrected some of their past behaviors on this. And so I'm going to just talk with you a little bit. I was going to read some of what I've written on this topic in my devotional book. Sometimes you have to stir the pot. But the essay I wrote on this subject was actually written about 10 years ago for a different writing project. So enough time has passed where I may or may not feel exactly the same about that. Before I continue, please take a moment right now to go ahead and subscribe to this channel. And after watching this episode, if you want to go back and click like, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, today's topic is pregnancy is not a sin. And I bring this up because it used to be in days past, the church was the very worst perpetrators of the idea that if a woman or a young lady or a teenage girl was discovered to be pregnant, then her family would be shunned. She would be shunned, pushed out of the church, and really ridiculed and pointed out for being a sinner, a terrible sinner. And the hypocrisy of that is just really stark as compared to what Jesus calls us to do, as in loving all of our neighbors no matter what. It is not the job of the church to point out either real or perceived sins in someone else. And here's where the hypocrisy falls. There are probably many people in your church fellowship, even in your families, who have engaged in sexual activity outside the bounds of marriage. And many of these people have these secrets that they carry into their death. And many times you don't even know about these secret sins if you indeed consider these sins. Now, if you watched last week's podcast on sex, you already have some of my ideas about that and how my ideas may have changed a little bit. And that's not the subject of this podcast. The subject of this podcast is the hypocrisy of treating someone worse because they happen to be pregnant. If indeed you believe that sex outside the bounds of marriage is indeed a sin, then that is the sin, not the pregnancy. And treating someone in your family or church badly because they're pregnant is totally missing the point, even if you're following the line of thinking that sex outside marriage is a sin. Before a church treats someone who's pregnant differently, then they really need to have a Sunday in church where they ask everyone in the congregation who engaged in sexual activity before they were married or after they were married with people they were not married with to stand up in solidarity for the pregnant girl so that she would know that she is not alone. Because If you really want to claim she did something wrong, it's the pregnancy that told her secret. There are many, many people sitting in the pews of your church who have the same behaviors that some people might label as a sin, some people might not. But if that is labeled as sin for the person who got caught, it's not getting caught that's a sin. If indeed it is a sin, it's what they did. So I do want to share some of my writing from here, and I will probably interrupt myself with where I have changed my thinking a little bit, but that's okay. This comes from page 161 of my book, Sometimes You Have to Stir the Pot. This book came out in 2024, I believe. Let me check. 2024. It's not likely going to be in print after the first quarter of 2026. Unwed pregnancy. For thousands of years, unwed mothers have been the target of shame and disgrace by her family and her church. This is still sometimes perpetuated today, with an unmarried girl or woman called out for being a bad girl. The female is held accountable for the sin of pregnancy. Well, news alert, pregnancy is not a sin. If you believe that sexual activity outside the bounds of marriage is sin, then that is a sin, and not just for the female who was caught by pregnancy. There should be no differentiation between any unknown sexual activity outside of marriage than a pregnancy that becomes known. Nearly all unwed sex is never exposed or known to those who have been kept out of the knowledge of said activities. Sexual activity is a private act between two consenting people, even if adultery is kept secret, and oftentimes no one knows or finds out. It is almost always an easy secret to keep for the entire life of the persons involved. It is very possible for no one to ever know. It is possible that while you are reading this chapter, you are thinking of one or more of your activities that have remained a secret. Pregnancy tells this secret. Our society, and especially the modern church, is misguided and unfair in its shame on the female when the male is oftentimes unnoticed because he does not obviously appear expectant. And this is where I think the modern church has done much better in the last 10, maybe as many as 20 years. Even if the father is also part of the congregation, his shame is never as great. Pregnancy is treated as a sin when it is not. Societal expectation for a female to remain virginal until the wedding night without that expectation for the male is wrong. And I do understand that in theology and on paper, that expectation is the same. In reality, in our civilization and society, it is not. The church can proclaim its doctrine and beliefs, but when their actions are discriminatory to the young people involved, then this is problematic. When I was young, the ones who were the most vocal about abstinence were not virgins on their wedding night. I do not know if it would be possible to gather accurate information, but I suspect that few people are virgins on their wedding night. Unfortunately, only those who are caught by pregnancy are exposed. I have conflicting beliefs on this topic, and if you watch last week's podcast entitled "Sex," you see how my beliefs have evolved. Ideally, saving yourself for just one sexual partner seems really sweet and nice. In reality, some people are not sexually compatible, and waiting for the wedding night to find that sex with them is a disaster seems more than tragic. As for my beliefs about sex and Christianity, I do not have all the answers, but I know that the church doctrines do not either. Pregnancy is not a sin. Focusing on pregnancy is totally missing the point, should the point actually be valid. What is the sin? Who should call out the sin? And I want to read from John chapter 8, verses 3 through 7. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this man was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Notice Jesus did not say, anyone who is not guilty of her sin, throw the first stone. He said, no, anyone who is not guilty of a sin or any sin would be the one to throw the first stone. The only one qualified to throw stones didn't. If God did not send Jesus to condemn others, then God certainly does not call us to condemn others either. And I would like to also recommend another one of my books that will soon be out of print, and that is a book entitled Sin. And a lot of the things that I've written and said and spoken about, especially when I'm focused on the inclusive love of God or God's forgiveness or God's grace, I have been accused of not believing that there is anything that is sin or wrong. And that is not what I believe. I don't believe that there is no such thing as sin. However, I do believe that God works and speaks to me about things that are sin for me. And God works with you to help you know the things that are sin for you. And those people over there, God works with those people over there to help those people over there know what is sin for them. God doesn't send me and you to gather up our rocks and throw rocks at them. In this book, I started writing this book during the pandemic, and that was because a lot of people were having to do online church without church in person, and people were struggling to do that. And so I created 52 topics that could be used for creating online services or a Sunday school class in person and things like that. And so that's where this idea of 52 topics came from. And I actually wrote discussion questions for this. The first discussion question for this chapter on unwed pregnancy is chapter 46. And this first question is a true story that comes from a friend of mine who used to work at Planned Parenthood here in Houston, who now works in Denver. And, I really miss seeing her on Sundays at church. She's a very sweet lady, but very vocal and bold. And I really like that in people. So here's question one. And this is a real situation that she shared with me. A friend of mine used to work as a counselor at Planned Parenthood. She told the story of a teenage girl who was brought to the clinic by her parents to get an abortion. The girl was crying, and my friend overheard the parents telling their daughter that she had to do this because their church could never know. My friend, when the parents were in the waiting room, told the girl that this was her choice and that her parents could not make the decision for her. The girl did not want an abortion, and Planned Parenthood helped her win the argument with her parents. The pregnancy was not the sin in this story. Was the most significant sin in this story the parents' desire to cover it up and hide it? Is it possible that their anti-abortion position lost to their need to hide the perceived sin of pregnancy? The hypocrisy of this story is just unreal. Parents from an anti-abortion church. It's really not anti-abortion. It's anti-choice. Anti-choice church. It's not pro-life either. Tried to force their daughter to get an abortion so that their friends at church would not ever know. It was the people at Planned Parenthood, my friend who worked for Planned Parenthood, who helped this girl make her choice. And her choice was not to get an abortion. This is what Planned Parenthood is all about. Those of you that are all against Planned Parenthood because, oh, they want people to get abortions. That's just a lie. That's a lie of Satan. That's a lie that comes out of the mouths of hypocrites. It's a place that believes in choice. And while these evangelical Christian parents, Christians in quotation marks, tried to force their daughter to get an abortion because their people and friends at church could never know that their child got pregnant. And the people at Planned Parenthood helped this girl know that it was her choice, not her parents' choice. Her parents could not make her get an abortion. And there's a story of Planned Parenthood doing their job and supporting this young lady's right to choose and protecting her from her parents forcing her to get an abortion. You know, you guys, this is what pro-choice means. It's pro-choice of the person, not their parents, not their church, not their government. You cannot predict my opinions on abortion from what I've just said. You probably could figure some things out. But we are going to have a podcast just on abortion, a topic that I almost never speak about because I pretty much disagree with everyone. But since I am a single gay man who had a vasectomy in 1989, the concept of abortion really should not be personal to me or in my decision making. And I'll talk about that more later. Okay. Is it possible that their anti-abortion position lost to their need to hide the perceived sin of pregnancy? Question 2, how is unwed pregnancy treated in your congregation? In what way should the Christian response change in the church and in the community? And maybe your church community does the right thing in this situation. I will say that I've been part of churches where teen pregnancy has occurred. I mean, it probably happens in every church. And I am very pleased to report that even in the most conservative churches where I have been an active member over the last 30 years, in the cases where I have known it to have occurred, almost all the time, the church has really risen and been the church and been Jesus to these youngsters and their families. Now, sadly, I can't say that in all situations, but I would say in most situations. So hopefully when you're discussing this, you can say, yeah, my church does the right thing here. Question 3. What double standards do you witness in your family? What double standards do you hold? You know, that's really bringing it full circle. I have kind of a large family. I just have one brother. So at this end, we have a small family. My dad was one of 7 children, 6 that lived to adulthood. 2 of them are still living. The oldest boy and the youngest girl are still living. All the ones there in the middle, and the 2 oldest girls. Well, the 3, because the first one that did not live to adulthood was also a girl. did not are no longer with us. My mother just had one brother who is no longer living. My mother's the only one left living in her generation from her family. I don't think my family is that much different than anybody else's. Uh, there are some secrets in my family. I know some secrets of the generation older than me, 2 generations older than me, and 3 generations older than me. And because of my work in genealogy, I can go back 4, 5, and 6 generations, and there are some family secrets. We tend to keep the family secrets. I will tell you, I know something about the generations older than me that I have no intention of telling members of my family, the generations younger than me. I fully intend that some of the things I know about the generations before me and my family, I'm hoping some of those stories will die when I die. And there's some certain things that I don't think that are relevant for people to know today. And I know there are secrets that are kept in my family. There's some things about my mother's parents that I know that I wish no one told me. But those are some things that it serves no purpose to tell anyone else those secrets. So while I'm started out this conversation saying pregnancy is not a sin, and if you want to say that it is the result of sin, then you need to be fair and call out everyone and force everyone to disclose all of their secrets involving sexual activity. If you are in any way going to highlight a 17-year-old girl who's pregnant. And so that's important to know and understand. Are there some secrets in your church? Probably. I've served on several church boards. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've been on the board at 4 different churches. That's not something I'm willing to do anymore. I've done that. I'm a firm believer that the success of the church of tomorrow begins today with younger folk. If everyone on your church board is over the age of 62, you're doing it wrong. That's my opinion. You don't have to agree with me. But I'm not willing to serve on any church board now because having all the leaders in your church over the age of 62, over the age of 65, over the age of 70 is a recipe for the death of the church. The life of the church comes from the younger folk. But there are some things that occurred while I was serving on the church board at these 4 churches that was not disclosed to the congregation of the church because there would be nothing positive to be gained by sharing that information. No, I do believe in transparency, but in situations where it's lose-lose, no one's been harmed, nothing is to be gained by disclosing it, then I don't think that needs to be disclosed. And for anyone who is thinking about anything that's happened in a a church that we share in the last 3 to 6 months, I'm not talking about that. Okay, it's all of a sudden while I'm speaking, I'm realizing that, oh, I know some stuff that's happened recently that some of us are talking about, some of us are not talking about, some of us. I'm not talking about that, people. I'm talking about in generalities. I'm not talking about anything specific. And if you're thinking I'm thinking of something that's happened recently, I am not, I promise you. In fact, that didn't even dawn on me until this very moment. Oh, Larry, you're saying some stuff that other people that know some stuff might be thinking some stuff. You see how convoluted this gets when you're dealing with a bunch of people? And, the bottom line is, Jesus said, he who is without sin cast the first stone. And if God didn't call Jesus to throw stones, then God's certainly not calling us to throw stones either. Our job is to love, accept, embrace, and include all people, no matter what. Even if people actually do something wrong, even if people are perceived to do something wrong, that's not a loophole. That's not a loophole. And that should apply also to our politics, Well, God bless you, my friends. This was kind of a difficult conversation to have. Pointing out hypocrisy is never easy. The good news, I started at the beginning. I don't know if it's because of the more inclusive, loving churches that I have belonged to in the last 20 years, but I do see an improvement in the way we treat the young ladies who are discovered to be pregnant. And we're not calling that the sin, even if for the ones who think of sin during that time. Thank you for watching this podcast. Later this week, we will be looking at 1 Timothy. Is that correct? 1 Timothy. And I believe the following week is Ephesians. Last week, the topical podcast was sex. This week, it was unwed pregnancy. Next week's topical podcast that comes out on Monday is on abortion, a topic that I do not discuss. But I felt if I am going to be talking about 52 topics during this year, I can't not talk about abortion. Okay, so look for these topics coming up later this week. 1 Timothy, beginning of next week, abortion. Middle of next week, Ephesians. Catch you on the next ones. Be on the lookout.